Hello, so today we're going to be talking about creating value in our drawings. We're going to begin today working with a new material as well. We're going to be using something called charcoal. Now there are two types of charcoal that we're going to be using in our drawings. One is called vine charcoal. Vine charcoal, as you can see from that, is very thin. It breaks easily, and it's very powdery when you use it. When you're working with vine charcoal, one of the great characteristics is that as you do your shading, it's easy to blend, and your value transition will gray out quite a bit when you're using vine charcoal. Do you see how soft the gray went when I did my blending? So I went from this to this. Another really great thing about vine charcoal is that it is erasable. So I can come in and edit and make changes if I make a mistake, which we always like. The second type of charcoal is a material called compressed charcoal. Okay? Compressed charcoal, that's an ED, is very different. When we're using compressed charcoal, you should notice immediately that it's a much deeper, darker charcoal, has a greater contrast than the vine charcoal. Also, when I blend with my compressed charcoal, it gives me a richer black. And as I smooth this in, it will give me grays, but the grays are much darker and don't fade the way that our lighter vine charcoal does. Also, compressed charcoal does erase, but after layers of it, it's harder to erase than the vine. So we always will begin by default with vine so that we can edit our errors and our mistakes. Now we're going to begin by doing a very simple shading exercise using a sphere. And that's what this thing is that you see over here. A sphere is just a three-dimensional ball. And when we look at this, there's certain components and parts that we're going to be talking about and that I'm going to point out to you. One thing I want you to notice is the light source. When we did our value introduction in class and you saw the presentation, I told you that value is created by light. If there was no light source, you wouldn't really be able to see value ranges. So if we think about that and with that in mind, we always have to do what I call chase the light. So we're looking for where does the light come from. Our light source in this situation is kind of interesting because this room has two light sources. But in a standard more sterile environment, we could just have one light source. But the stronger light source is coming and hitting our sphere on the very top, right here. That is called the highlight region. That's a lighter area. Okay? When we look down below that, you're going to see this darker gray area. That's called your core shadow. Okay? That's the basic value range that we're going to be creating in just a few minutes. Below that, I hope you can see clearly that there is a lighter silvery gray area that is touching the darker, what we call cast shadow on the table. Okay, the cast shadow is the darkest area of your drawing, or it'll be the darkest area of our drawing. Okay, and then above that will be our what's called reflected light, and it makes a silvery gray. You see that on rounded spherical forms because light actually is bouncing up from the table and hitting the base of that sphere, so it reflects. Now before we jump into charcoal shading, I want to do a shading exercise, a very short one, with the material that you're probably more familiar with, which is pencil. I am going to be shading a very small, on my paper, sphere in pencil. And I'm looking for the light as I see it in front of me. Now when we establish our things on the table, we need our light source. So we're going to pretend, here's our happy sun, that we always tell you not to do after elementary school. But we're thinking if our light is up here like it is in my situation, I want to first find my cast shadow. And the cast shadow is going to be under my object. When you're shading with pencil, it's a great idea to use circular motion with the pencil. Now you should notice that this is a very small pencil drawing. And I'm doing that because I don't want to take all of your time watching pencil when we're primarily focused on charcoal. using circular motion, and the darker my shadow, the harder I'm going to press. And then near the ends of my shadow, I'm going to release the pressure and let it fade. I'm using a Ticonderoga. That's kind of my go-to elite pencil when I'm using only one pencil grade. Now if you have standard drawing pencils with a full grade, including the Bs, the HB, 2B, all the way to 6B, that's fantastic. You can use those. Now I'm going to look at my object. I'm next going to establish my core shadow. Circular motion with my pencil. And then I'm going to have this kind of gently fade to more of a silvery gray. And I know this is small. I just want you to see the relationship to this and charcoal. There are no hard edges. You want an even, smooth transition from one gray area into the next. Remember that a value range from our introduction in class has areas of white, all the ranges of grays, and blacks. So you can see that on this now, here is my highlight, here is my cast shadow, and here's my reflected light. Now let's do another one in charcoal. And the first thing that I'm going to do when I begin this is I'm going to make my sphere larger. And for you intellectuals out there, you're going to quickly realize, hey, that's a lot bigger. That must mean I can do this faster. And you are correct. So I'm beginning with my vine charcoal. And I am initially going to establish my cast shadow. I'll come in later and add in my compressed charcoal. With charcoal, one of the biggest differences in pencil is that I get to use my fingers. It's a more sculptural type drawing process, and what I mean by that is I get to involve my entire hand in the drawing rather than just the point of my drawing instrument or my drawing tool. Charcoal also, because of the nature of the blending and when you fade it, the edges are not going to be as sharp, so we have to come in and do a little cleanup at the end with charcoal. You'll get used to the feeling of this on your fingers if you've not used it before. Now I'm going to come in with a little bit of the compressed. A little trick, if you put the vine charcoal down first, it makes the compressed, if you do it on top, easier to erase. So we've kind of got our shadow happening. And now I'm going to go into my sphere. And a lot of this, don't panic, is just dust. Oh, there goes my sphere. It's like reality drawing exercises. So now I'm going to find my core shadow on the sphere. Usually my cat is the thing moving objects in the videos. So I'm blending this down. The residual charcoal on your finger actually can create most of the silvery reflected light area for you. And again, similar to what I did with my pencil, I'm using a circular motion with my finger. I don't want any lines or streaks in that. Gradual application. There are multiple ways that you can do charcoal drawings. We're working in this situation from going with a white surface and then gradually building up our darks. There's another method that we'll learn about later when we do our still life, of taking and beginning actually with gray first. So now I'm going to come into my core shadow and add a little bit more contrast, and then blend more vine into that so it facilitates the blending. I'll make this a little more gray, silvery gray through here. And then we're going to take a look at what we've done. And then of course the last step with any charcoal work is you have to erase what I call the paw prints, or the smears that are in areas where you don't want smears. So I'm going to clean up my areas here with my pencil. I would advise using the pink pearl pencils with pink pearl erasers rather, or get a pink pearl eraser. It cleans up charcoal better. I'm not going to fade this right now, but you can see that it has the areas that we discussed. So it has highlight, it has a core shadow, it has a cast shadow, that's the one on the table, and of course it also has the most important part, I feel, for three-dimensional forms, which is the reflected light. And the reflected light is usually a silvery gray. I was going to write gray, reflected light. Okay? So this is the basis of using charcoal shading to do a very generic sphere. The other thing that you'll be doing in class today will be a value scale or transition that goes from the darkest darks to the lightest lights. And we'll discuss that more in class. Thanks.